Story 1. My nephew lives with me in an old farmhouse built in the 1840s. When he was a kid, he told me that there was a little boy named Charlie who lived in our house. He said Charlie had never heard of video games and that Charlie's dad left him home all by himself. This was around the same time that he had an imaginary friend named Mr. Cat, so I wrote it off. A couple weeks later, I was shaving with the bathroom door open and thought I could see my nephew kind of looking in at me out of the corner of my eye. I stuck my head around and could see him from behind, messing with an old china cabinet we keep important stuff in, and just as I walked into the room, I could see my nephew sitting in the living room watching TV. He couldn't have crossed that much distance that fast or silently. I asked him about it and he said, "Oh yeah, that was Charlie. He says there's a really super book in there from when you were a little boy." And at the bottom of a stack of old documents and stuff in the china cabinet is a book I got as a gift when I was a kid. I didn't even know it was there. It was under 2 boxes of documents and couldn't be seen until the boxes were lifted out. The little boy didn't look like you think of ghosts. He wasn't transparent, he didn't float, and he didn't look spooky. He just looked like a kid. Now I'm convinced that people see ghosts every day and don't realize it because they look just as real as we do. I haven't been able to find any information on people who lived here in the past. My grandparents bought the home in 1967. I asked my grandmother about it and she said she wasn't surprised I saw Charlie in the bathroom at all because when I was little, I played with a little boy I said was named Homer, and Homer would unroll all the toilet paper when nobody was home. I've never seen her, but there's also a woman ghost who appears to be in her mid-20s with long brown hair. I have no idea why I've never seen her, but a couple other family members, some friends of the family, and several members of the work crew that remodeled our home saw her a couple years ago. Story 2. I want to tell the story of my sister. She's the reason I'm convinced of the paranormal. We'll call her Grace. A few years ago, she was attending the 4th grade in Cali. Each and every day, she'd walk to the bus stop by herself. That is, until one day, she comes home with a slight smile on her face and walks up to my mother. "Mom, do you know a girl named Scotty?" My mother was on the phone, mid-conversation, and her jaw dropped and she became silent. She ends the conversation immediately with, "I'll call you back." I'm now going to backtrack. My siblings and I never got to meet her actual grandmother, our mom's mom. She passed away in 1966 when her mother was 7 years old due to kidney failure. Our mother never really talked to us about her mother. There wasn't much to tell, save for the fact that she was horribly maltreated at school for not having a mother. Her father would remarry 2 other women, and it was on the last one that the marriage stuck. We'll call her Cindy. Cindy was a witch. Though she didn't want her to be referred to as a mother for her stepdaughter, she wanted me and my siblings to know her as her grandmother, pretty much punishing my grandfather and berating my mother if they ever brought up Grandpa's first wife, her mother's actual mother. So we never really got a chance to know who this woman was, let alone that her nickname, her preferred name when alive, was Scotty. So to have my sister come bounding in asking about this person she didn't even know existed was a shocker. Of course, the usual questions came along about how and why she was asking about Scotty. "She sometimes walks me to school, tell me funny stories, she says she misses you and Grandpa a lot. Oh, and Gary is safe." My mother was speechless. She was too young to know about Gary, her uncle, who passed away years before when we were all so very young. Again, our mother never really spoke much about him, as his sordid past wasn't a subject to be had around little ones. Our mother ended up holding the equivalent of the Spanish Inquisition to find out who gave her young daughter this kind of information, but everyone was found to be innocent and not say a word to her. Grace would claim to have seen Scotty a few more times, then the sightings disappeared. That is, until we moved to New Hampshire. Living in a 250-plus-year-old town is guaranteed to have old-time graveyards. That is where my sister likes to go. Immediately, she was attracted to graveyards and would spend hours sitting on graves just staring at the markers. "What do you do there?" I asked. "I like to speak with the people that float around," she replied. "A lot of them are pretty strict, but for the most part, very nice." This would continue on and off for a few years, mostly held in private, as she would sneak out or say she was going to a friend's house. The friend's house in question was usually a grave somewhere. I would sometimes tag along so she didn't feel compelled to lose this gift. However, what sealed it for me that there was another side was when my grandfather was in a medically induced coma, waiting for the angels to come along and whisk him away. My family was there to say goodbye. It was finally time for Grace to say goodbye to the only grandfather she got to know. She stroked his wispy gray hair and started to speak to him, then started to mention the names of people she had never told about but claimed were in the room with us. She talked about how Ernie was there, waiting for him with a beer, and how his brother Marvin, who passed away before she was born, couldn't wait to see him again. And the look of sheer surprise on Cindy's face. These were people who had not enough significance to be brought up to be spoken about in our lives, but Grace knew. My mother turned pale. "Oh, and Scotty's waiting for you, Grandpa." Cindy was mortified and stormed out of the room at this point. My sister looks at her mother, a beaming smile on her face, and says, "Grandma Scotty says she'll always love you, Mom. She says you did a good job raising your kids." I love receiving gifts, but I don't think I'd ever want to receive such a gift. I would be scared all the time. Story 3. When I was a kid growing up with my mom and dad is black and my mom isn't, I always knew that I had a strange heritage and family history. I'm born Scandinavian, specifically Danish, and so is my mom. My dad was born and raised for the majority of his life in Tanzania. He is technically the chief of the Maasai tribe he grew up with after his father passed away. His father's name was Anali. The belief is that I am the reincarnation of Anali, as I am the firstborn son of my father's children. That fact was always something my dad told me, but as a kid, I just thought it was kind of cool. I never really thought about it too much, but I never really believed I had any real connection to Anali. He also passed away before I was born. When I turned a certain age, I had some weird obsession with the 3rd of April. Still don't know why, but to this day, it just seems like the perfect date to me. I started thinking about that date often, and my mom even told me she heard me say it in my sleep once or twice when she came in to check on me. About 2 years after that, I was taking a walk with my dad and said something along the lines of, "I wish my birthday wasn't the 3rd of April." My dad stood still and looked at me, sat me down and started asking me questions like, "Why is that date special?" I started to realize there was no real reason and that it just felt right to me. He told me that that was the day his dad, Anali, had passed away, and I was kind of freaked out about it. A week later, I woke up and I saw a person sitting on the end of my bed. I can't describe it, but it wasn't frightening. It was actually very calming. It was weird because I knew I should be scared, but I just wasn't. He got up and left the room. I laid back down but couldn't sleep again. The next morning, I told my dad about it, and he didn't believe me at first until I started describing how the person looked. My dad's face changed from humoring me to serious. It turns out I had perfectly described his dad. It's a little hard to believe, I know, but I know what I saw. This one isn't necessarily scary, but definitely paranormal. Story 4. This was about 10 years ago, but it still gives me chills just thinking about it. My now ex-wife and I had just got married and moved into a new neighborhood. We moved in the winter. As spring came, we noticed there were multiple dead animals, birds, squirrels, and raccoons, in the yard. We cleaned them all up and started to make improvements to the outside of the house and paint the inside. I started to notice strange things going on. Keys are not where I left them, stuff like that is small. I thought I was just being forgetful, and things slowly started to escalate. While in bed, I could swear I could hear a barely audible conversation, like a radio in a faraway room. As soon as I tried to focus on it, it would go away. I started to hear footsteps at the other end of the house. One night, while lying in bed, I heard a huge crash that woke me up out of a dead sleep. I went into the kitchen and saw my kid's hamster cage in the floor, about 15 feet from where it was. We would put it in the fridge at night because we had a cat and didn't want it to get to it. Now I know what you're thinking. The cat knocked it off. But this cage had to fly over a breakfast bar and a kitchen table to get to its resting place. Then things got ugly. I would be sitting at home watching TV and I would have this uncontrollable thought. What would it be like to be possessed? Or I want to be possessed. I couldn't get this thought out of my head. I couldn't concentrate on anything but that. I would literally have to say in my head, I love God, I love Jesus, over and over to get off the original thought. I need to add that I am not a religious person. As soon as I left the house, I would be fine. Not one thought. But as soon as I pulled in my driveway, it would start up again. Uncontrollable. I thought I was going crazy. I sat down with my wife and looked her dead in the eyes and said, I think I'm going crazy. I've been having weird thoughts. She turned white and before I could say any more, she said, You want to be possessed? Come to find out, for the past month she had been having the exact same thoughts. And we started to compare stories. She told me that she was lying in bed without me. I worked seconds at the time. And she could hear a man whispering through the baby monitor while a child was fussing. Needless to say, we moved out within the month. We ate the deposit. Her oldest daughter was still in school and we had moved across town. I had to pick her up at the house on my days off when she got dropped off by the bus. As soon as I turned the corner, I would get those thoughts. I would sit in my car in the driveway and not even go inside and wait. Story 5. I was young and sitting by myself in my living room playing some Halo when I noticed that the room around me seemed oddly quiet. I paused the game and tried to listen for the difference. It was strange. My house is over 100 years old and usually there's an odd creak audible from somewhere nearby. Not now though. It was very quiet. I felt strange but not threatened. There was nothing sinister about the silence. I sat for a few more minutes just listening. It almost felt peaceful, actually. Then suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder. Very lightly and briefly, but even today I still remember the distinct feeling of a hand on my shoulder. It didn't scare me. Nor did I jump in surprise. I actually felt a familiar presence, like family. I mentioned the experience to my mom and she told me she'd experienced the same thing, only one room over. She says she felt her father's presence with his hand. Pretty cool. Man, that would have scared the pants off me if it happened to me. Have you experienced anything creepy? Drop your story in the comments and tell me about it. While you're at it, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more hair-raising stories in my channel. Story 6. I'm a proud man. I was far too proud to admit that ghosts exist or would scare me, but for a couple months, I was haunted. It started when I got my Ouija board and I never read the rules. My friends were too chicken, so I did it alone. I talked to 2 people that day by myself. One was a little boy named Tim who was disowned by his parents and met his end in the forest. The other presence was much darker, and for 2 questions I asked, it would reply end, which was not a valid answer. I got angry with the second one and yelled at it to prove its malicious nature to me. Nothing happened. I packed the board away, feeling as if maybe it was me the whole time, which is a common notion for disbelievers. But then the next 2 months happened. Between 3 to 4 a.m., I consistently woke up with terror sweats and felt as if I was being watched. About 50 days in, I awoke to the most horrid screaming and a thud so loud I thought someone was breaking in. I jumped up and felt again like someone was in front of me wanting me to end, and yet there were no sounds from my upstairs housemates. I got so scared that I quit sleeping at night. I would stay up until 6 a.m., at least to make sure that ghost hour wouldn't affect me, but it came anyway. I'll always remember what happened in 2 months. I was playing COD as typical for the past 2 weeks, and all of a sudden, I got this cold chill in my back, and it went to my left shoulder, then also onto the left side of my head. And I kid you not, I heard breathing in my ear. The pressure in my upper left side was as if someone or something was leaning its head on my shoulder. I was frightened, but I decided, screw this. I got up, swung my fists, and screamed, "Go away!" And after that night, it seemed to stay away. I don't know how all this happened, especially when I was such a non-believer. Those months felt like a dream. But I do believe now that certain energies do manifest around us, and it's best to stay away from the evil, hurtful ones. Story 7. My cousin used to live in a house that I'm absolutely convinced was haunted. It felt strange there. I felt uneasy going to the toilet on my own for some reason. The dog was never happy there at all, and there were tons of strange electrical issues, such as the TV turning on its own. I slept there one night and I heard noises the whole time, like someone walking up and down the stairs, door squeaks, and the TV turning on again. I was actually really scared and wasn't that young anymore at the time, and had never believed in ghosts at all. Even my uncle, who's the most no-nonsense guy in the world, said he felt someone's hand on his shoulder. Just walking around felt strange, but it's hard to put into words. They ended up even having a vicar around to cleanse the house, but they ended up moving after a few months, leaving behind a big deposit. It's crazy that a bunch of normally rational people were scared out of a house. I myself never went back after the sleepless night there. Story 8. My grandfather told me this story about how one time he was sitting in a chair in front of the house when he heard his wife repeatedly calling him from inside the house. The thing is, my grandmother passed away a few years before that, but he told me that the voice was so pressing that he actually got up to look inside the house. And as soon as he got inside, he heard a loud crash behind him and turned around to see that the chair he had been sitting in moments ago had been crushed by the cast iron gutter that fell on it. If he hadn't come inside the house, he would have probably been seriously injured. I don't know if it's paranormal or not, but every time I think about it, it sends chills down my spine. Story 9. The house my parents own now was built in 1820. The first few years we lived there, my little brother kept complaining about a little boy. He said the boy would wake him up at night and ask to play. My brother was annoyed and just wanted to sleep. He said he sometimes would see him run down the stairs during the day, but then wouldn't be in the living room. Well, while doing some work on the house, my dad found a bunch of old newspapers in the attic. This was a common form of insulation back in the day, so it wasn't a weird find. There was an article dating back to somewhere in the 1880s. I can't remember the date, about a family who lived on our street. They had a boy who was attacked by a bear in the woods behind the house and passed away. The boy was the same age and similar in description to the boy my brother kept seeing. My mom felt the need to stand on the stairs and tell the ghost or whatever that he had already passed, that a bear had harmed him and that he should go towards the light. My little brother stopped seeing the ghost. I'm not sure if the ghost was helped or just stopped showing up out of contempt. Story 10. My experience with ghosts is that if you tell them to stop or go away, they do. I think they just want to be known. I talk to them all the time. My neighbors probably think I'm loony. Yes, I am for real. Just strange things that happen on a regular basis. The house I am currently in is just me and my young son, so he goes to bed at 8 and I watch TV in my bedroom. Every single night I hear little feet running upstairs back and forth, back and forth. We have an attic that has been remodeled to be a third bedroom. It's not a creepy attic by any means, but I won't go up there at night alone. So when the running starts, I go to the bottom of the stairs and shush them. It usually stops the second my bedroom door opens or I pause the TV, but I shush them away. I tell them not to scare my baby or wake him up. A good friend lived in the house before me. I rent and she did too, but she's now a homeowner. She said that her mother-in-law stayed up there, and the next morning, she came down reciting prayers and said small children haunted the attic. Her mother-in-law is a very old-school religious Spanish lady, so I get why she was freaked out. I'm not overly religious, and I definitely believe that there is a ghost or ghosts in my attic. I'm not scared, but at the same time I don't want to see them. Hearing is unnerving enough. Story 11. When I was young, I went to my friend's house for some booze for his birthday. I probably only had about 5 drinks. In the early hours of the morning, probably around 2 or 3 a.m., I head out to the kitchen for a drink. I poured a glass of water and turned around and took a sip, and as I'm swallowing, I swear I heard footsteps. The ground in the entire room is all made up of tiles, so I held my drink down and listened for a few seconds. Next thing I knew, I heard fast footsteps in front of me running towards me, and suddenly a huge cold breeze blew right through me. At that point, I just freaked out and ran back to the bedroom. I ended up waking my friend up and telling him what happened, and we listened and could hear odd bangs and bumps from out there, but nothing out of the ordinary after that ever happened. I'll still always remember it though. It gives me goosebumps to write this. Story 12. My dad once told me a story about one of his cousins. The cousin used to live with his family, wife and daughter, in an apartment building. On the floor above them lived an old widowed woman whose young son, around 24 to 25, served in the Indian Army and had passed away during a bomb attack somewhere in North India. A few weeks after the funeral, my uncle started having dreams about the son who had passed away. He would tell my dad and his mom that the son kept knocking on his door in the dream and just stands there once the door is opened. He had the same dream for 2 weeks straight until one night before dinner, he opened his front door to go down to the lobby and saw the son standing in front of him. He quickly shut the door, freaked out for a few minutes behind the door, and opened it again to find the son still standing there. I'm not sure what happened right after, but my uncle then started seeing the son inside his apartment. Then it just stopped. I didn't see the son anymore. Maybe it actually happened, or it was the psychological aftermath of overthinking about someone's passing. It creeped me out regardless. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. What's the creepiest, scariest moment in your life that felt straight out of a horror movie? Story 4 is downright creepy. See you on that video.